Welcome to the Net Profit Podcast with Ryan Kibler, your net profit CFO, helping business owners like you grow their net profit one episode at a time. And now your host, Ryan Kibler.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Net Profit Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Kibler, the Net Profit CFO. Today, I have a very special guest with me. I've got Dom Loffredo with me. Dom works at the $1 Million Success Group and really focuses on HR inside of law firms and helping them hire in the right way. And today we're going to dive into some of the hiring pieces and human resource management. So I'm excited to have Dom on the show today. This is not a topic that we've covered in the past. So Dom, thank you for taking the time and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Happy to be here. Yeah, so just a little background about myself. Dominic Loffredo, go by Dom. I'm the director of operations where we specifically work with at the $1 Million Solution estate planning and elder law attorneys across the country to help grow, manage the day-to-day of their firms. And really, at the end of the day, we focus on making sure that your goal as an owner or partner to realign, right? Why you became a partner, why you got into law, to realign your values, right? A lot of times attorneys want to be attorneys and not managing the day-to-day, not doing HR, finance, bookkeeping, et cetera, right? Sure. There's all those aspects that we both, along with Brian, help firms with. So a big part of my role is the HR, recruiting and staffing your offices, developing talent, engaging talent, and all the moving pieces behind the scenes with that.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I mean, attorneys and especially, owners of law firms. I mean, I like to help them get as many hats off of their plate as possible, as soon as possible, especially the ones that you dread doing and the ones that are like just take you like a really, really long time to do, right? Because it's not in your wheelhouse. And the HR is usually one of those pieces, right? HR kind of hiring, payroll, that kind of thing. Like on your side of things, before we dive into a couple of the tools you use and stuff like that, when do you see like law firms can, start to afford to work with you and it makes sense? Like what size revenue business typically do you guys start working with?
Oh, that's a great question. Revenue-wise, it really depends on the state and the structure of your firm because each firm has a little bit different dynamic, if you will. I like to answer that question by the size of the staff. So I would say, like 4 or 5 staff is typically the entry-level starting point, right? Yeah. Where firms are. We do help several solos who contract out a lot of their stuff so that they can just be the attorney, kind of like what we're talking about. But starting that and, up to 30, 35. Yeah. So a lot of smaller firms, private, right? These aren't big firms that, hundreds of attorneys. That work 1%.
For sure. Yeah. So I would say, 4 to 5 staff members, and that could also include contractors as well. If you're contracting out like legal work.
Yeah.
That's a good time frame to start, partnering with you guys like on the HR side and the coaching side and the other things that you guys do. Mm-hmm. That sound fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Love that. So now our audience kind of knows like, the size that they should be trying to get to in order to get HR off their plate. And then I want to really dive into, because I know you help a lot of attorneys with their hiring process, help them recruit talent, things like that. And I know you guys really utilize Kolbe for that. And you're big on the Kolbe test. I would love it if you would just share with my audience a little bit, what Kolbe is, how it can help you hire, how it can help your team, and kind of just give us a background and kind of set the stage so we can dive into it further.
Yeah. So, well, before I get into the Kolbe specifically, a lot of people are most familiar with the different personality assessments out there. So personality assessments like DISC, Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, so many different ones out there.
Yep.
They focus on so there's 3 parts of the mind, right, in total. The most common, personality assessments out there that evaluate whether you're introverted or extroverted, type A personality, et cetera, they either look at the cognitive part of your mind, right? So your learned behaviors, skills, education, or they look at the affective part of your mind, right? So your motivations and values.
Got it.
Those 2 aspects are very useful, right? They certainly have their place. But the thing is, they actually change from time to time, right? So your skills and experience, education, like that develops over time. You're just going to learn things naturally, right? And throughout, fantastic. The motivations, the values, I always give the example of, right? My motivations personally as a college student versus now as a dad of 2 little girls, very different, right? Change over time. that is good. And so those assessments have their place. But the one part of the mind that there's only one assessment that evaluates it is the Kolbe, and that evaluates the conative part of your mind. And really what that is, the instinctive strengths, right? Or your MO of your mind. And what that helps to define is that the best way to describe it is your gut feeling, right? When you say, man, I should have trusted my gut. We all have had those experiences. And then we go back and we're regretful of, I had that thought, right? But I just, for some reason, I didn't trust myself. That is your Kolbe, right? Or what the Kolbe looks at. That's your instinctive strengths and qualities about yourself. And I like to point out that doesn't change from time to time, right? That is, it's innate within us and how we are. Kind of just like, the left-handed, right-handed example. Kolbe's been around for 50 years, celebrating that this year, actually. They've completed up to 30-year studies where you take it today and in 30 years, and you have, not to have the decimal point, or I don't have that memorized, but it's like 93, 94% chance of getting the same results 30 years later, right? So very reliable, which is huge in the HR world. And it's also objective, which is fantastic, right? It helps us take a step back and really focus on the strengths, right, needed.
Got it. This is the one test that sounds like over a long period of time, most likely is not changing versus the other two types of the brain that you really look at, those kind of tests or tests that tie to those parts of the brain. If you took a test today and a test in 10 years, your chances of getting the exact same results are realistically probably very little, because I think, you go 10 years out and yes, we learn a ton in 10 years and our circumstances change in 10 years and our motivations are going to be different. So I think it's, fairly safe to say that the other two parts of the brain that, these kinds of tests, you're not going to get the same result today as you would in 2035.
Yeah, certainly.
All right. Very cool. So I love that. That's a great kind of background to kind of give everybody and let us know kind of why you've chosen Kolbe and why you work with it. And then tell us a little bit about, I guess how it works. And you mentioned that it's like kind of judging your gut feelings, so to speak, but they've gotten that into a test. So talk a little bit about that, like how that works.
Yes. Yeah. And so they're very careful, right? And be careful to say test. I like assessment. I still think there's got to be a better word out there, but the Kolbe result isn't to associate with what you can or cannot do, right? Positive or negative. Actually, if someone takes it, it's on a grading scale. If you get a number from 1 to 10, right? 1 is typically reviewed as negative or bad, and 10 is great. They flip that upside down, right? So their numbers, it's 10, 9, 8, 7, and goes in reverse order, because wherever you fall in it, it is a strength, right? But how does that apply to the role, right? So thinking about that in a creative way, in a supportive way to locate, right, find the right person that's going to be an instinctive match for the role. And, that goes along with the engagement and communication side of things. So in terms of how we utilize that, right, in the test, I would say it takes 5 to 10 minutes on average. You answer 20, I think it's like 25, 26 questions, actually.
Done pretty quickly.
Each person who takes it gets a copy of the same results that we or any other certified Kolbe consultant gets, right? So it's super transparent, which is another benefit and appreciation I have of Kolbe, especially, right, if we're using it on a potential job or job candidate.
Sure.
You see the same thing, right? This is not a behind the scenes, covered up thing. It's very transparent, which a lot of candidates really appreciate it. And they appreciate the insight that they get from the report after taking it.
Got it. And so you mentioned everything kind of comes through a result like on a number scale, and you mentioned it kind of goes 10 to 1. So I assume, like, if for the firms that work with you, I assume that they're, kind of working with you, putting together the job description, putting together like, this is what we want this person to do. And then from that, I assume you're coming out with, okay, what kind of number scores do we want, like, in order to match this job role? Is that fair to say?
To a degree, yes. So the Kolbe actually has a few different assessments. So there's the Kolbe A, that is each individual's personal results, personal instinctive qualities. And there's what's called the right fit. So that's where we prefer that to be the first step, actually, where the supervisor takes that and answers, right, a different set of 25, 26 questions, very similar format and time frame needed to complete it. But the supervisor fills that out and answers based on what instinctive strengths are needed to succeed in this specific role.
Got it.
So then you get, we call it a right fit. It gives a range for each of the 4 modes. I should explain the 4 modes just for a little background. Yep. So the first is, so for the 4 modes are what you get 4 numbers for. The first is fact finder, right? So how you gather and share information, right? It looks at, do you want a lot of information or do you want to, pull like the 3, bullet points, right, from a report or all this data that we are inundated with the technology we have today.
Okay.
Second mode is follow through, right? How you handle systems and processes. Can you cut through the clutter and find the quickest way to do it? Or are you great at building out a very thorough and, just well thought out process and procedure? Third is quick start, how you handle a risk and uncertainty. Do you stabilize? Do you innovate? And then there's implementer, which is how you handle space and tangibles. So meaning how you physically work with things, right? Do you want to envision like a product that needs created, but you're not the person to physically create it. You're just mapping out what needs to be built. Or are you the person working with your hands physically, creating something? Again, very physical, building something, fixing the printer at the office, etc.
Yeah.
So in that regard, going back to the right fit, right, that helps clarify, right, what is the ideal strengths, right, we need to find in the candidate to make sure it's a match. Then the original Kolbe report is called the Kolbe A, right? That's our personal, you have candidates take that, we put them into the right fit and it spits out a score, right? So it actually grades them in terms of A+, right? They're a perfect fit, B+, C, etc. We typically suggest you hire B+ or above on that scale. Again, it creates an objective reports for you to run and match candidates. The right fit also helps the supervisor not hire people just like themselves. And that's actually one of the biggest struggles we see, where if you do it with before or you hire without the Kolbe, a lot of the times, right, we like to hire people similar to us because they think similar to us, right? Yeah. And not, by design all the time. It's a lot of times we're unaware that we're actually doing this. So it helps provide that disconnect to be objective and gives another way for you to compare candidates, right? Who is the best fit for this role? And obviously for the candidate, this enables you to work alongside that role, right? So that you're using your natural strengths well and daily, instead of versus when you don't use the Kolbe, you can find somebody who's very different and a mismatch naturally. And that just makes the candidate or the individual feel like they're paddling upstream, right? You burn a lot more energy. That's when burnout, stress, anxiety takes over. And then you lose that employee or at risk of losing them, and you have to start from scratch. And we certainly don't want to do that to our people. Put a lot of time and energy. We want to set them up for success from day one.
Sure. I want to backtrack for a minute, and I want to kind of give an example that the audience could probably relate to. And that is so if we were to look at the score or an ideal score for hiring an attorney, because I think, a lot of our folks out there are attorneys and they probably are hiring attorneys or trying to, right? If I had to guess, they're probably very high on the fact find scale, right? Very good at research. Do those two things tie together?
A lot of times with attorneys, we call it initiating instead of high. So depending on we'll say the scale of the report, they're initiating fact finder, initiating follow through, meaning they start by researching the facts or they start by building the process and system. There is very few attorneys that I've met who are, we call it on the other end, right? Resisting fact finders, right?
Yeah.
Attorneys at least need some, good information, right? If they are, slightly lower on the fact finder, they have that learned behavior, right? So they're using a cognitive part of their mind, right? They learned through college and law school that they need a level of research, right? Or they have an amazing staff support person, right, alongside of them who fills that gap, right?
Yeah. And then the other one you said was being a quick start, and that kind of ties to risk and uncertainty. Mm-hmm. I'm sure on that side of things, probably much lower risk tolerance, so to speak, much more uncomfortable with uncertainty, right?
Yeah, so that actually depends on the background. So a lot of attorney owners of the firm, they basically got into law, I would say 2 ways is how I divide it, right? They are initiating quick starts as well, where they are open to taking on risks, so they have a higher tolerance. So they jumped out and said, hey, let's try this, right? I want to work for myself.
Yeah.
Or, right, attorneys who aren't that way, I would say 9 times out of 10 in the industry I work with, at least, right? I can't speak for everybody, who are lower on the risk but started their business, which is always risky, right? Regardless of business to do it in. They had a lot of experience working from somebody else who did it, right? So they had that 10 years, the 15 years of experience. I'm not saying that you have to wait 10 or 15 years to start your own firm before they were comfortable, right, to take that risk, right? So they built up a lot of facts, processes with their experience to take into that role.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes you do see like kind of both ends of the spectrum, depending on the candidate. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually super interesting. Even the sales aspect, right? So how comfortability like selling to clients, right? Interacting on that level, right? Do they want to be client facing or do they want to be behind the scenes, like very good drafting review attorney, right? Because again, in the role, some are very client facing, going out speaking at events versus not. That also you'll see a difference, right, in the Kolbe results too.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it. And then, so after they take the test, you kind of, as far as like a candidate, they take the test.
Yeah.
They, you get the results, and then, you're recommending the fit be at least like a B+ or above, as far as compared to the test that, the hirer took prior to putting the test out there to the candidates.
Yeah, exactly.
And go ahead.
There's obviously other factors, but that's B+ or higher, just because then that's anything lower than that, you're really at risk of that mismatch in instinctive strengths, and they're going to get stressed from day one, right? Working against, how they most naturally work, and you're trying to rewire their instincts. You'll see strain early on. Yeah. Go below that B+.
So you're really testing, like, do they have, kind of not only the skills, but do they have the right fit for the job as far as from a how they operate standpoint. And that way you're not creating stress by the things that they have to do.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this is really a tenure, I would say, assessment, right? It helps, right? So doing this with, I don't know how many firms we've put through the system over the years, but just in our owner's firm, right, who's an attorney herself, I mean, turnover is way lower, right? Clearly credit Kolbe with that and a lot of these candidates because they're a perfect fit for their role, right, with their individual score. So I call it a tenure thing to make sure that they're set up for success long term. Really, it's where we've seen the biggest impact, right? Because people aren't working against the grain all the time.
Yeah. And I think, when you hire that way and the scores fit and the job just is kind of in their wheelhouse, so to speak, like it helps them adapt to the other new things like company culture, how everybody works, other people that are in the space, and just allows them to get started quicker, which means as an owner, you get a return on your investment faster.
Exactly. Yep.
And I think, the other big benefit that we could talk about is, like you mentioned, I mean, cutting back on turnover. I mean, I think all the listeners in the audience know hiring is expensive. And so cutting back on turnover can really be a big deal. Yeah.
I mean, it's statistically speaking, right? You have a 1 in 2 chance of losing a new employee after 2 years. That's not very long. And you put in a ton of time, right? Time training, developing, onboarding, let alone also the hiring process. It's very expensive. The overtime you're paying for the work of, that's being missed and on somebody else's plate currently there. It's all these, hidden costs to it. So you want to keep people long term, certainly, and, put your best foot forward to set that up, right? And do a lot of those, behind the scenes steps that people forget about. But we've seen it time and time again, right? People, firms will come to me, hey, we hired this person, great culture fit, right? Which is super important, right? You have to have all the components together to hire the person to set themselves up long term. Kolbe is just one major piece of that. Culture is a really big piece, and so on, skills, etc. But hey, we hired this person, we knew him through a connection, great culture fit. There seems to be a disconnect. Can we do that Kolbe thing you talked about? I'll have them take that right fit first, say, okay, what do you actually need in that role?
Yeah.
Then I have that individual take it. And they couldn't be more different, right? I've done that time and time again with firms of, hey, that person might be great. They're great work, but you know what? They might be way more happy, right? Engaged and productive on the marketing team, right? Or et cetera. And sometimes, great, we can make that transition. Sometimes the firm's small enough, they don't have that spot, right? And it just doesn't work out. Like the person's not working, right? They're working against the grain that causes all this stress. That's when miscommunication happens, right? They're not trained the right way because you don't have their Kolbe. All these things play a factor and work against you, right? You don't want to have to rehire more people.
Sure.
Time, effort, and money.
Yeah, I think, a lot of like kind of business systems and, a lot of like business coaches and things like that are out in the marketplace that coach entrepreneurs. I mean, a lot of the common terminology is getting the right people in the right seats, right? We hear that a lot in the business marketplace. And I think that is absolutely a valid thing, right? There is value in getting the right people in the right seats. And I think like what you're doing with this test with the Kolbe is really going to go a long way in helping you get there, right?
Yeah.
And, as we talked about, I mean, hiring can be, really, really expensive, especially right now. In the current marketplace we're in, unemployment is really low, especially in the legal space. A lot of like recruiting firms and things like that my clients are currently working with, are charging 20 to 25% of, first year compensation. When you start working with firms and they're charging that much, I mean, you're talking like $20,000 to $40,000, right? Having a new hire come in at that kind of a price for them to only stay 1 or 2 years seems really rough, right?
Absolutely. You're losing money at that point, right? When you have that turnover. Yeah. And it's like you said, the unemployment's low, the job market, right? There's so many things up in the air, a political conversation here, but there's just so many things up in the air, regardless of where you're at or where you stand, that a lot of people don't want to leave their jobs, right? So how is you as an employer take that extra step to be more appealing to candidates? Honestly, I've had candidates who, right, talk to me as a recruiter of, oh, okay, so you use this as a communication tool. I've never been asked, like we've never talked about, hey, what's my preferred communication method? I just have to send everything via email. We don't meet, and et cetera, right? Small example.
Yeah.
Things like that add up to, what may attract somebody to leave that role to come to your office.
Sure. Yeah. If that doesn't, fit their style, right, and they've never been asked, I mean, you're right. I mean, that is a little thing, but definitely adds up over time.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't love email, right? We all know how that goes. 100 emails in the inbox a day. So I think, we've kind of covered Kolbe in the hiring process. What about after the hiring process and kind of, working with the candidate, through onboarding and then kind of ongoing, knowing kind of how they tested and how they fit their role. I mean, how can we really leverage Kolbe, like really training employees and kind of on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. That's the next big piece, right? When you hire the right person, right, you have all those, the Kolbe, the culture, the skills, et cetera. Now you have to train and onboard the person. And that's actually where a lot of people fail, right? That's almost 50% of the time why people leave a job, because they were poorly trained and are poorly supported ongoing, right, in that role. So how we use the Kolbe with our company, and a lot of the firms we work with have adapted this and taken this on as well, of at the first couple of weeks, right, we have a one-on-one conversation with the employee to go through their personal Kolbe A results, explaining what it is, right? We want that person to be engaged enough to read it on their own, obviously, but they're not certified, right? They don't have a bunch of background to dive into that. So, and that's a 45-minute, right, call one-on-one, right? If you're hiring enough, do that once a month or every other month with all the new hires together, right? To be a little bit, more times there. If you're hiring constantly, right, that adds up to be a bulk of time. So we do that. And then instead of the annual performance review, we do something called catalytic coaching. It's based on a book out there. I am blanking on the writer's name. We can add that to it, but it's a fantastic system where you start meeting with somebody 90 days into their hiring, where you check in, hey, from your perspective, what did you do well, right? What are your accomplishments, disappointments? How would you like to improve? What are your goals for the next, short-term, long-term, et cetera? So the candidate or the employee gets the buy-in because they're kind of running that first call. Yep. 2 weeks later, the manager does the same thing, basically. From my perspective, this is what I feel you could have improved on. This is what you did well, right? And it's made to be a positive experience, right? It's not just these are all your mistakes, right?
Sure.
2 weeks later, you create a plan, and then you touch base quarterly the rest of the year. And then you restart that year to year with each employee.
Yeah.
So people have gone through it numerous times, right? We have employees 15, 20 years in. We haven't been doing it for 20 years, but we've done it for probably 10, 11 years now.
Yeah.
We tweak it, we refresh it, right? But Kolbe's a big part of that because we also have the Kolbe B assessment. This is where you fill it out based on how you feel you're expected to work. Okay. And this isn't to put the employee on edge. This is to see, does the B match the A, right?
Yeah.
How they feel they're expected to work. Is that aligning with how they actually naturally work in a perfect setting? And when they're aligned, great, fantastic. Because if they're overwhelmed, right, and they're aligned, it's not a cognitive issue. It's cognitive, it's affective, right? It could be the training, it could be just the values, it could be a new manager, right? New managers change the dynamic. It could be the culture, it could be the commute, it could, right? But when they mismatch, then we can say, oh, it's a cognitive issue. And this is how we get ahead of it, right? We don't do it to put like micromanage and, just watch over people's shoulder all the time. We do it to be proactive. We want to catch potential of stress, anxiety, overwhelm before it's too late, right? Because again, we don't want turnover, right? We invest in our employees. We want to keep them long-term. Let's get ahead of this. So the Kolbe B is a big part of that. But we just, throughout the coaching process and review meetings with management, they're checking the Kolbe of, hey, does this still fit the role best, right? As things change, where their workload is way larger, or, hey, they're now helping this department, and this department focuses with the research more than the systems, and they're more of a systems person, right? So that, that causes a negative rub. So that's a big part of it as well. The other aspect is whoever is meeting with the employees they're managing, right? So a manager needs to know how to communicate to their staff, right? Yeah. And the Kolbe tells us preferred learning methods and communication methods. So the manager really needs to be self-aware of that, so that they're providing the background from the right perspective to that employee to set them up for success, right? So just being aware of what those for channels of communication and learning are, right? So that goes into the training process and just how to delegate to people efficiently, right, and successfully. So those are just a few of the ways that we have Kolbe infused throughout the life cycle of the employee to make sure they're we're on the same page.
For sure. I love all those things you just listed. I mean, especially kind of regrouping every single year and kind of having a reset on where are you headed as an employee? What do you want to get done? And then having management also kind of look at it and say, like that aligns with where we want you to go, right? I mean, all of those things, obviously they take a time investment to get done, right? But as far as like being able to do them and, are simple, right? Like kind of simple to do. They do take time, but I think the long-term results, I would guess for the firms that you work with that do that, right? Probably have happier employees, probably have employees that stay longer term, which you and I, as we've both discussed, really can save you thousands and thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah.
Versus firing up the hiring process again.
Exactly. Yeah. Honestly, I meet with entire firms, right? Throughout the year. Sometimes it almost works out about quarterly. Right? Yep. The happiest firms collectively, right? Not just the owner that I meet, have Kolbe infused throughout the process because they know the most about each other, right? They know how to communicate where, hey, Ryan and I may be very different, right, on the Kolbe, but we know how to communicate still, right? Because we're kind of self-aware of that and what your needs are versus my needs. It's well received. It's infused throughout the culture. It's not just that we're burning bridges all the time, right? Yeah. This is just too far past, right? Because you hire the wrong person day one and get in and you have to fire them in 6 months because they're just not able to do the job well. It's not an instinctive fit, or they quit themselves. That looks really bad on your current staff, whether you're a good employer or not. Okay. So that's the other aspect that it really helps to improve, because a good employee seeing other people constantly being in that role and not working out, that provides stress. They're like, man, what's going on? Am I just lucky in my role that I'm secure and I do a good job? Or, that's when all these basically negative thoughts, start stirring around and impacting your culture negatively.
For sure. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think all of these things, like taking the Kolbe assessments and all that, They do, take a time investment, but I think the results are really well worth it, right? Especially as we just talked about. I mean, contribution to culture, employee fit, the happiness of your employees, right?
Yeah.
And, the last piece that I'll kind of tie in here, especially, at a law firm, is the happiness of your employees. I mean, if you're an owner, especially if you're an owner of a bigger firm, those employees are dealing directly with your customer, right?
Yep.
Which also probably leads to more client happiness. Like if you have an employee in your organization that, maybe they're an attorney, maybe they're a paralegal, maybe they, talk directly with clients on the phone and update them of, case status or whatever. Like you don't want them unhappy talking to your clients, right?
So, absolutely.
So I think huge piece, huge headache, we're really taking care of here. So the last piece that I kind of, I guess kind of want to cover just, for a minute is, I'm sure there's a lot of law firm owners out there thinking, okay, Dom, this all sounds great. Maybe I'm ready to invest the time. I'm ready to really make the shift in my practice. I, see the results, that this could produce for me. Now my biggest fear is this is going to cost me an arm and a leg. So can you walk us through just like roughly, like I'm not going to ask you for exact numbers, but like a rough ballpark, like if they want to go hire an attorney and do the Kolbe test and kind of take them through the whole process, I mean, what does it look like from an investment standpoint to work with you?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. I'll start with the Kolbe, right? The Kolbe A assessment, that's a person's individual results or assessment. That's, if you go through us, it's $50 a person, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, you don't have to keep retaking it. So the per person level, I think that's pretty darn affordable. But there's some really expensive assessments out there, and you retake those multiple times.
So that means if I'm a law firm owner and let's say I'm hiring an attorney and let's say I look at resumes and I narrow it down to like, I want these 5 candidates to take the test. You're talking $250.
Exactly. Yeah. Of Kolbe tests.
Wow. All right.
Yep. So, and then there is the right fit. Now that's $325, but you take that for the one role, right? And you don't have to take that, right? Now, if you create another attorney position that does a different type of law, right? Or a different focus, that requires different strengths. So we have you take one for each role, but those very consistent. You don't have to retake those as well. Yeah. And that's what gives us the grade scale, right? Where you take all 5 of those candidates, all their individual results, pull it, and it provides you great leadership reports and why, right? This person is a better instinctive fit than that person. Yeah. So there's lots of the insightful reports on the back end as well. Yeah. And so in general, to work with us, I like to say we're not a cookie cutter organization where we are kind of customized to fit what the firm's needs. So some kind of take us on a retainer, just flat fee for that specific position.
Yep.
Some just kind of want us ongoing, right? Searching for roles, searching for the next best person, right? Or qualified, right? Fit for the role, and they'll make a spot for them on their team. So it really depends really on what you're looking for. And, we take into account the time aspect, obviously. Sure. And that I would certainly say that, there's lots of, as you mentioned, lots of firms or HR companies out there who work with firms taking 20 to I've seen up to like 35, 40% of first year salary. We are nowhere near that. We do not take that big of a portion. Like I said, we're hourly or flat fee, and it doesn't add up to be that much. Now we charge separately for Kolbe's. So you're hiring for 100 positions. You're not going to spend thousands of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kolbe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. I mean, I love the idea that, you can implement Kolbe testing for each one of your positions, and, you could test your top 10 candidates and it would be less than $1,000. And I think, you sit there as a law firm owner, and even if that takes your stick rate from, an average of 2 years to 3 or 4 years, $1,000 is well worth it. Like, it's not even close, right? The value is there. It's not even close. I mean, I would highly recommend, for all the lawyers out there. I mean, I know you guys are high research, right? Highly recommend, start going and researching this test, research Dom, and the $1 Million Solution. Dom, I kind of want to wrap up with, for the firms that are out there, maybe they go do a little bit of research and then they decide, hey, we should really start this process and we want to work with you guys. Where is the best place for them to connect with you and, kind of go down that road and start working with you?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, themilliondolarsolution.com, right? They'll see the contact us form that goes directly to me where you can get on my schedule right away. We'll include my email probably next to my bio or something. But that's just dloffredo at themilliondolarsolution.com. Really, the next step is just setting up a call with me. I want to learn how we can best help you, right? And create a personalized plan, for meeting your goals and your needs.
Absolutely. Love that. Dom, I just want to thank you again for, taking the time, coming on the show. Love diving into this stuff today. And I think there's a ton of value here for the business owners out there that are listening, just with the Kolbe test and implementing it and using it in hiring. And I mean, you can really change company culture with these kind of tools. So I love that. So again, I just want to thank you for coming on the show and taking the time.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity as well.
Absolutely. Well, I highly recommend that you all connect with the $1 Million Solution. And until next time, everybody, go accelerate your profits. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Net Profit Podcast with Ryan Kimler. Make sure to subscribe or follow the show on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget to check the show notes for our guest contact information and to connect with Ryan on his website, netprofitcfo.com.